Hey, it's Bear Gardener, back with another video. This one, another video focused on sort of new player advice and ideas. So that's the tenor of today's video. As ever, you can check me out at all the links down below. I'm a cards content creator, member of the cards contributor program. I am, however, as always disclaimed, not paid by, endorsed by, or affiliated with 1939 Games. They just kindly use my content for new players and give me a little bit of external support. So my opinions are my own, my views are my own, and I'm not perfect. But I do focus my content on trying to help out new players. So, what's this one? I've done lots of new deck guides and stuff like that, and I'll make sure you check out all the bits in the YouTube channel, particularly the newer player stuff if you're into that thing, and this will link to some of those. This particular video is about something that I get asked about and haven't addressed as well as I'd like to yet, so I'm going to try and address it in a bit more depth, which is the order of crafting, what to add to my decks and when, and how do you go about growing a collection in an efficient way. First off, this isn't definitive. I can't give you a straight line, these are just the best things to craft based on every individual nation, because the game's way more complex than that. It depends on your archetype, it depends on your play style, it depends on the way that you're approaching it. What I'm going to give you is something that I had in mind when I created my starter decks. So I created improved starter decks for all 5 main nations. They are available in this channel. You can go look at them, watch them, and I've done detailed guides on some of them, and there are more detailed guides to come. I hope eventually to cover all of them, but those take longer to make. I talk a little bit in there about what you aim for as a list, but I don't talk specifically about kind of rewards and what to craft when. But people ask me this on a regular basis, so it also feeds into the free-to-play thing. Because to stay free-to-play, you kind of need to use your nation rewards relatively efficiently. When I came up with the idea of doing starter decks, it was a little bit more than just, can I improve the starter decks? It was, how could I do this in a way that would allow people to get enough knowledge of play and get a decent collection of cards efficiently? Originally, I wanted to recommend 5 decks that all kind of interlinked with each other, and you could give some advice on playing them all at different levels and their card pools feeding together. And then I realized that 2 nations became an outlier because they're their own thing. Those 2 nations, by the way, are Britain and Soviets. They are still perfectly, the starter decks work really well and the thing is there, but they're a little bit harder to do. They might get their own video in the future if this is popular enough. This video is going to focus on what I created at the heart of my original pre-starter deck. So I originally decided that I wanted to use US Frontline and Japan Aggro as 2 good starter decks, because the base decks that you get from starting the game and hitting level 12 for those nations feed into those archetypes relatively well, and you can craft 2 really quite decent versions of those decks using just nation rewards. Again, you don't need to use any of your wild cards from Great, you don't need to spend money, you're not even dependent on opening things in packs. That's just a benefit, which was the core of my intent creating these decks, to keep it as free as possible and as easy as possible. I then realised that because they share an ally, I needed to have access to more Germany cards. And the way that progression works is a bit limiting. So when I looked at it, I realised that there was a good reason why you also needed a good base German deck, and then I was like, okay, so if we do Germany-US, then we can everything feeds. These 3 just become a triangle that feed together into creating it. So I'm going to talk about how that works and crafting patterns, like an actual progression of what I would envisage as the best way to do this. To do that, we need to have a conversation about nation rewards and how they work. It's time for a spreadsheet. Honestly, I'm not wanting to drive anyone crazy, but this is the way that I tend to approach things. So what did I do to come up with the best crafting advice I could get for you? The first thing I did is I looked at what rewards you get. So what I've done is I have broken down the rewards for the first 100 levels of the game. So this chart will look a bit weird because a lot of levels are missing. So let's explain why. I've ignored up to level 12, because up to level 12 it's fixed with a couple of random bits pack-wise, but ultimately it's relatively fixed, and as I say in my new player starter video, which you should definitely watch if you're a new player to the video, that's the first thing you should do. Get all your nations to level 12 before you even think about this stuff. So we've ignored those 12 levels. The next thing I've done is I've removed anything random, so packs aren't in here, random cards aren't in here, emotes aren't in here, card backs aren't in here. What I wanted to focus on is, in the first 100 levels, what wild cards do you get that are available for you to then use to improve your deck? Each of these 100 levels, of course, is per nation, so they are cumulative. So this chart, which is on the screen at the minute, breaks down every card reward that you can craft, every wild card reward that you get in the first 100 levels of each nation. Some of these are noted as nation wildcards, some of them are noted as open wildcards. An open wildcard is a wildcard that can be used to craft any card of that rarity in the game. A nation wildcard must be used for the nation that you're progressing, so in the case of the US, it would have to be a US card, so on and so forth. So you can probably tell from the bar above. We're going to get into that in a minute. So, you can see in the first 100 levels, you actually get a decent number of cards. But there are certain limits. You only get 2 elites. People have asked me before, why do my starter late game decks only have like 3 elites as a rule in them? Because you only get 2 elites, plus the free one you got on your way to level 12. Elites are very rare, so you have to craft with care. You get slightly more specials, and you get a really quite decent amount of limited and standard cards, so much so that my crafting patterns don't use them all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go deck by deck, the way that I would use the nation progression. But the absolute kicker in this, the thing that I need people to recognize, these 3 progressions are designed to be used together. Like, they're designed to progress and coexist as you level up. They're not separate. The design here is so that by playing a relatively even percentage of Frontline, Germany Midrange, and Japan Aggro, as you go up, you will get 3 decent competitive decks for the level that you end up at. That's the whole purpose of this. It is to create a whole cloth pattern. So this will be less focused than some other contributors have done. I know that there is an excellent video out there on US Frontline crafting priorities. There will probably be some differences here, because I'm also trying to feed ally cards to the Germany deck. There'll be a lot of similarities, but my point is these are collective. They're not intended to be used separately. You totally can, but you will get a slightly weaker end result because you won't be buffing your ally nation. Or if you want to buff your ally nation, you're going to have to slow down the progression of your main nation. Use all 3 together. You will get all 3 decks progressing at a good rate all the way up. And, in my opinion, you'll also get an excellent grounding in the method and play of the game. Because by playing these 3 different archetypes, you will learn about the different ways that the game interacts in a positive way, and you'll get 3 decks, and you'll have variation, and you can change things around, and that's the way I prefer to learn. Some people prefer to focus on a single deck, just get it good and get good with it and keep going. If you want to do that, this is a good place to start, but you might have to tweak the crafting a little. In particular, you might have to think about using your open wildcards, the very rare open wildcards that you get on this progression, for your ally nation, and relying on cards that you get from packs and crate progression, both of which are not accounted for in this. Right, so let's get started. So this is my crafting plan for the US Frontline deck. Now, this crafting plan is designed to take my improved US Frontline starter to its end, like its late game version, the ones listed in the video. This is not current super tweaked meta. It is a good, rounded, solid Frontline deck. You will probably find things that you like to do differently, or talk to people and they'll make suggestions about including different cards. That's amazing and cool. And I'd love to be able to do a video where I can somehow manage to account for all of that in the way that you go about things, but sadly, that's not possible. It would just be too much work. So, let's take a look at what we're talking about. So, at level 14, we get our first wildcard. Our first wildcard is a limited nation wildcard. In the case of the US, I recommend crafting 5th Rangers, because this is a fundamental card for the US Frontline deck. At level 16, we pick up 2 standard nation-specific wildcards. I recommend 164th Infantry. Start panning out your 1-drops. You're already set up with Greyhounds, you already have 1 Red Devils, which you obviously can't craft until you get to specials. We'll get to that later, so this is a good thing to have in. Then at 19th, we get another 2 standard nation wildcards. I recommend that this you use to craft a 3rd 164th Infantry and a Sherman. Gives you some more draw. At level 20, we get our first special. This is where we start to have to think quite carefully, because we're not going to see a lot of these. I highly recommend your first special for Frontline, as a US special, is Red Devils. It is such a strong card. It may not seem like the biggest and coolest and most impressive of special cards in the world, but it is so good, so strong, and so fundamental to what you do. Level 23, we pick up 2 more nation-specific standard wildcards. I recommend crafting 164th and a Stars and Stripes. Stars and Stripes is something I advocate for new players. There is some debate at high-level play as to whether it's worth including or not. I personally like to, other people don't, but I think it is a very good value as you're leveling up. Then at 24, we get another limited nation wildcard. This is another 5th Rangers. We're going hard on 5th Rangers because we really want to see them because they're strong. At this point, at level 24, we're done with standards. We have the standards we need for this deck. So when we get those standards, you can go try different things. You might want to craft some stuff to buff ramp or a different deck idea or an archetype. I am focusing this progression not on giving you advice as to how to spend every single reward, but how to use the rewards that are available to efficiently get to 3 strong decks. So at level 29, we've got some standard nation wildcards, but we have nothing to spend them on. We're done with our standards. Level 33, we pick up another limited card. This time, we pick up an M10A1. Now, you could get your 3rd, 5th Rangers here, but I recommend the M10A1 because having that unit, a body with suppress, is really important. Now, you might use 5th Rangers, and if you do, I'd recommend using one of the 2 previous wildcards to maybe include a Duress in your deck until you can get the M10. What I will say is I don't think Duress belongs in Frontline. There just isn't room for it. The M10A1 is Duress, but with a body. It's just better, objectively. And it's been tested at high level. Like, I know a lot of people at lower levels look at Duress, the card, and they think it's really strong. It is not played at high level on a regular basis. The reason being, 1 card in your deck, when you start getting into really well-refined decks, is a hugely important thing. And there are much, much better impacted cards that we can include in Frontline, like the M10A1, which gives us the same effect, but with a really good tank body. Anyway, not too much detail, but M10A1's my choice. You might want to swap it around. We've got some more standards at 34. Again, we're done with those. 37, we hit another special. I recommend the 99th because we like having the buff. Lets us make our front line stronger. 39, we pick up two limited. 39, we pick up another limited wildcard. It's nation specific. I thoroughly recommend. I've just realised I'm just going to hop back to level 33 briefly. Note, this is an open wildcard, but I'm still using it for US. This is where you might diverge if you are not interested in leveling multiple nations at once. This is one of the rare opportunities you will get to get anything for your ally that you can control. Which, by the way, is why I recommend leveling at least 2, if not 3 decks at the same time, or nations at the same time, because that gives you broader selection. But anyway, you might actually want to use this if you're hyper-focused on just playing US and Frontline, and only US and Frontline, to get a German limited card. Just saying. Anyway, we picked up 99th, then we get to 39. This is a nation wildcard. This is our final 5th Rangers. This is great. We love to have this. 42, we pick up another one. Gets us a second M10A1. Previous reasons, just a great card. 44, we've got some more standards, which obviously we're not using. 47, we pick up another special. I recommend doubling up your 99th. 49, we hit our first of 2 elites. We get an elite at 49 and an elite at 100. I recommend your first elite is 327th Pathfinders. Some people might find this controversial. Some people might be going, but Skytrain, or but PIR. And if you want to play that way, you can, but my reasoning is PIR and Skytrain both have a much more significant random element to them. PIR buffs a random infantry unit, so it can self-buff and deny the buff to the thing you want, and can be removed. And Skytrain generates random units in your support line, but it can fill your support line with things you don't want, and it can be suppressed or broken or removed. 327th Pathfinders, used well, wins games. You can see my video on the main deck and my video on my Battlefield guide to playing this deck, in which I talk about this in detail. But the 327th Pathfinders is, in my opinion, one of the strongest elites in this deck, if not one of the strongest elites in the game. Because when played well, it can give you so much value that it can frustrate your opponent's plans for a significant period of time. Anyway, it's my recommended thing. At this point, we've now filled out our limiteds. So now we've got this big pile of free cards that we can go. We've got like a limited open card, some standards, we've got a limited nation wild card coming up here. These are all free slots that you can kind of go and do your thing with, because at this point your frontline deck has its US requirements in standard and limited cards. When we hit level 70, we get a special. Now, this is the first time that the next 3 specials are all about personal preference. There are 2 really good choices. The Hellcat and the Devil's Brigade. Hellcat it can be an incredible finisher. As a blitz unit with decent attack and the ability to feed into Blitzkrieg, it can be an incredible finisher and it can win you games. Devil's Brigade is less likely to insta-win you a game, but it does have the 1 point of damage that it can deal when it's deployed, even if it's not against an Alpine unit that you need to remove, can be really strong. Like, really strong if used well. So, your mileage may vary. I personally would craft a Devil's Brigade here, but you might want a Hellcat. We then skip all the way down to level 87, and I get another special, and at this point, you can pick either, again, it's the same choice. Eventually, you're kind of going to want 2 of each, but you're actually going to end up with not quite the perfect land, but because you already have 1 Hellcat in the base deck, I believe. So in the end, you're going to want to craft a Hellcat and 2 Devil's Brigade. The order is your choice based on your playstyle. The last of these 3 comes at level 97. when we use a special open wildcard. If we have been lucky enough to actually draw cards from packs and stuff by now, which is very possible, this can also be a time to be able to buff Ally Nation a bit quicker. But again, we're designing this with the intent of focusing on multiple decks, broadening our horizons to build a more complete collection. Finally, at level 100, the game goes on way beyond level 100, but I'm only doing the first 100 levels. The game goes way, way beyond, and there are many, many more rewards to unlock, but this is the point at which we hit a reasonable level of completion. I just wanted to clarify that. I don't want anyone to think you hit level 100 and you're done. No, you keep going. Like, I'm currently, Lord help me, I'm almost level 200 in some nations, and you can go over 350, and it's crazy. You can keep going. Anyway, at level 100, we get another elite. Now, this is PIR or Skytrain, and this is all personal preference. It depends on your playstyle. Some people prefer Skytrain for strong, kind of consistent growth of tempo. Other people prefer PIR for hard buff to finish. They're both really good choices. In the end, you're probably going to want both. They both are run in core Frontline. I personally would craft probably PIR before Skytrain, but that's my personal playstyle. And that gives us 100 levels of US Frontline. So let's look at Germany. The German deck that I recommend has quite a strong tank focus. And so that's the direction that we're going in. But as we're crafting these, we are also looking at feeding into US Frontline and Aggro, because this is our ally for both of them. This is the thing that knits this whole idea together. So, same logic. Our first limited is going to be Panzer 35T, because we want a full set of Panzer 35Ts quickly. They're amazing. When we get to our first pair of standards, I recommend Panzer 38Ts, because they're card draw, and I have talked endlessly about how important card draw is. Next set of standards, however, I recommend getting some response control and removal tools, so picking up Sudden Strike and Pummel gives us some decent options. They're not perfect. Yes, there are lots of special and elite cards that are better. We don't live in a perfect world, and I'm trying to give you the best chance with a limited deck. Eventually, you will probably replace these with better cards, but these have had good value for me as I've played. Level 20, first special. It's 20 Panzer Grenadier. This will surprise no one. This card is so strong that we run 2 of it in this deck, the US deck, and the Japan deck. It's so good. Standard, we pick up our last pair of 38Ts at level 23, completing our draw suite. 24, we get another limited. This time, we go for the 64th Panzer Grenadier to give us credit acceleration. This deck is kind of a little bit about credit cheating forward where it can, which is why we're done with standards at this point very quickly. We're not too worried about standards. 33, we pick up another limited card. This is, again, it's an open card, so if you're focusing on this deck, Allied Blood, I've talked about this in the previous section. But this is holistically, so we're only focused on Germany cards from leveling Germany. Next choice, 64 Panzer Grenadier. Next special, level 37. Again, will shock no one. We get our second 20 Panzer Grenadier. It really is that strong. Level 39, we take a limited card to get a Blitzkrieg, so that we have 2 of them available for the decks that need a pair of them. Level 42, we get another limited, and that completes our 64 Panzer Grenadiers. Then at 47, special time again. Next special, another incredibly strong card that we run 2 of in all of these decks. 22 Infantry. Level 49, time for our first elite. This is interesting, because for the Germany deck, my elites are chosen to give you enhancement options in different ways. Now, I like the Yagged Bomber here because it gives you a really powerful tool to send something back to hand and give you a big threat on board. However, there is actually not a bad argument for flipping this and getting the Heinkel HE115 first to give you access to tutor cards out of your deck using Spoils of War. This is my recommendation, but depending on how you're finding the deck playing and whether you have landed some other kind of big finisher unit that you're finding works better for you, or other control tools, you might want to swap them around, but I can't predict that. This is based purely on only having access to these cards. At that point, I would recommend the Yagged Bomber. We had a limited at 51. I recommend an SDKFZ222. This card is underrated. We only run one of them, but it's really handy to push forward and give some buffs. Try it. You'll be surprised how good it is. And then we're done with our limiteds, which is great. Right. Into the latters. We're done with limiteds and standards, so we jump to our next special. Panzer III F. Doubles up on the Fs, which are big endgame units for this. They give us that big tank buff, which we're kind of looking for because that's what this deck's all about. Level 87. Right, concentrate on this. This is a lot. We get Enigma as a special. This is particularly for Japan aggro, my early Japan aggro deck. Now, there's some debates with this. There are other things you might want to take depending on what you've got and how your Japan aggro deck's working. But I like Enigma. I think it's a good card. Then we skip down. We've got a whole free special because we're done. But at level 100, as we talked about before, this is where we pick up the Heinkel HE115 or the Yagged Bomber if we chose to get Heinkel first. This is a relatively clean list, and it not only gives you a good functional Germany mid-range deck that is quite tank-focused, it also gives you excellent cards to support the nations. Japan aggro, same deal, crafting path. So 14th level, we get limited. 15th cavalry, we want to get this. 15th cavalry is such a strong card in this deck. The two standards that we get at 16, I recommend 24th cavalry because this is not a late Aggro deck, which will have more specials in it and more particular cards in it. In particular, it will fill out with some extra specials and other bits of tech and tools that you might want to use. But for this deck, starter deck, I just value thinning. The fact that this card thins itself just means that it shrinks your deck size and gives you better access to the cards that you want. So I recommend having a set of it. It is such a good filler card for any Japan deck until you get the cards you want later. So craft a pair of those. The next standards, pair of expansions. We've talked about this. Card draw is really important. The reason I don't craft expansion before 24th is that 24th is card draw-ish. It thins the deck. It brings itself back out multiple times, which is worth doing. Expansion, however, is really strong and we want to use it. First special is the Type 94 TK early. It's just a great tank. This card is really, really good as an aggro tool. It may seem fragile, and it can be, but it can give your opponent a headache and eat some stronger removal than technically its body warrants. Next, Standard Nation Wildcard completes our set of expansion and also completes our standard wildcards for this deck. Really quickly. We're so not worried about standards here. We get some good starting standards in Japan, and you can then play around and tweak with different things that you might want to replace, like the 24th Cavalry, with different things that you might like. You might be an Akita player who really likes them. You might be lucky enough to get access to Mito Regiment and do stuff like that, but we're focusing on the core. And that means we are quite heavily using our limited cards, leading us to level 24. It's a limited nation wildcard. This is the Type 93, which is the buff unit. The next limited is another Type 93 at level 33. These just drop them down and watch the buff get you value. 37, we complete our set of Type 94 TK earlies. Talked about the strength of this. Then at 39, we grab Shin Hoto. Now, I like Shinhoto as an early game finisher option. Other people don't. Other people would rather go in different directions. And depending on what you've drawn, there might be something else you want to try. Because Shinhoto doesn't stick around into top tier Japan aggro decks because it's just a little bit slow and expensive. But for most of the game, I honestly believe you'll just get great value from it. So we pick up a couple of those because we pick another one up at 42. At level 47, we get a special. We use our open to get the Sendai Regiment. So it gets us a pair of these. I love Sendai. It's a really powerful removal tool. There is an argument for honourable death, and it's a good argument. But this deck was built before that was a major thing. So you could make the change, but then you'd need to use another later special to get honourable death, which I recommend you do, but that's not the focus. This is focused on getting you from the base deck that I posit to the final deck that I posit. It's elite time at 49, and controversy will ensue, because there are people who are not going to like my choice here. I'm going to justify it. There are people who are going to think I am insane for not taking Signal Regiment or Shiden. There is method to my madness. Audacity, in my opinion, is an incredibly undervalued card. It has really good impact when played well. For example, you are dropping Audacity and you have a Type 93 on the board. It's doing 4 damage to a random enemy. It's really strong removal. And then you have a 4 damage bomber that can fight anything at once as long as there isn't a fighter on the board. It's smokescreen, so it's protected. I really like Audacity. I really value it. There are plenty of elites that this deck wants eventually. Bombing Raid, Signal Regiment, Shiden. For that matter, there's the multi-salvage whose name I cannot remember to save my life, but it's another card that this deck wants. My memory is failing me, so I'm going to go and have a quick look to remind me of what it's called. On the Ascent is another card that this deck eventually wants. There's also the anti-aircraft gun. This deck can push you for elites. These are just the recommendations that I used in my main video. Your mileage may vary. Ask some people, get some advice. You might disagree, and that's okay. You might want Shiden now because you're finding the Hien is not finisher enough. But my argument is Signal Regiment is just win faster. It's a good card. We want it eventually, but I don't think it's urgent. Shiden, we kind of already have a close enough finisher with Hien that Shiden is just an upgrade, whereas Audacity is giving something that we don't have. Audacity is giving us a very powerful card. Anyway, I recommend you draft Audacity. You will also notice I'm now done with specials and limiteds and standards, and the next thing you see on this list is just level 100. And it's Shiden. Because a lot of what you're going to want to add to this deck at this point will depend on the style that you choose, whether you decide to stay Japan, Germany, or whether you shift across and go to Japan, Soviet, or Japan, Finland. You might want to use different crafting. And I like to leave this open because this will give you a good, solid Japan aggro deck that will be playable, efficient, and win games, and that you can then riff off. As I said at the beginning, the intent of this is not to give you a focused list of how to build the best X deck. I'm not a big fan of that content. There's plenty of it out there if you want to go find it, but I don't think as a new player that's what you need. I think as a new player what you need is access to a good broad collection and multiple, in this case 3, good decks that will see you through most of the game and can be improved upon gradually as you go. You will have all sorts of things that you will draw that will let you try different things. This is to narrow the focus to give you 3 consistent decks that you can go back to, learn the game around, and then grow from. As ever, I really hope this was useful. This is something that's been on my mind to do for a while, but as you can probably tell, there's a fair amount of breaking down and figuring out how I want to approach this. It's quite a complex subject. hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you find it useful. And as always, just be good humans. And I look forward to catching you in my next piece of content. Take care.